We play and call it work.
Hey everybody, Matthew here from miniwargaming.com, and welcome to another Sit and Talk, the show where you ask us anything about whatever you want. We go on a rotation and answering your questions. It's my turn this week. Next week will be Josh, so if you want to leave questions for him, make sure you leave those in the comments below, wherever you happen to be right now. And I'll do my best to get through the comments, but this show's about an hour long, so whichever happens first, getting through them all, or the hour. Don't forget as well, every time a Sit and Talk goes up, an open vault usually goes up as well. So if there's one up today, it'll be at the link below in the Mini Wargaming Vault, so for our vault members only. So go check that out at the link below, before or after you watch this, whatever you prefer. So let's just jump right into the comments. First one, Sean Leary. Hey Matt, first of all, I just want to say I love Mini Wargaming and the energy I've put into this community. Well, thank you. First question, I love your RPG campaigns. I know you have spoken in the past about them being hard to monetize and organize as they require people to be RPGing with you, not working on other projects. But do you see any more RPGs on the horizon? Yes, we want to do Age of Sigmar Soulbound. We have some plans to do that. I've got everything purchased. I've been reading through the rules. The trick, like you said, is it's the number of people required on the project versus the views and vault signups it normally gets. We've done several RPG shows now, some with some D&D, some with Dark Heresy. Yeah, that's it, right? My brain is just kaputting right there. So we've done a few different ones, and none of them have seemed to really get the traction that we would like. And I'd love for them to get traction because I love role-playing. In fact, as much I love tabletop wargaming, miniature wargaming, but if we had to rank them, I love role-playing even more. So I'd love to do that even more. But you need more people to make the episodes. Like in a battle report, you need 2, right? And whereas in an RPG, you need Games Master and a minimum 3 other people. Typically, you want 4 or 5. And so that's a lot more manpower to get the same amount of videos created. And if those videos get a lot less views and a lot less vault signups, then well, of course, that's obviously a thing. However, not everything we make has to be perfectly optimized with the most views and vault signups we want. As long as we're creating the shows that can do well, then and we can get ahead with those, then that allows us to use our excess manpower to do more passion projects, things that we would love to do even more, but there isn't quite the popularity of it to do it. And so we're working really hard. Over the holidays and because of the pandemic, it keeps cutting into our manpower because somebody all of a sudden gets the sniffles and they've got to stay home and wait 3 days to get a COVID test and then wait a couple days to get the return from that COVID test. So they're off for a week. And then the holidays, of course, really put us behind. So we're working really hard right now to get ahead in our content. And then once we're ahead, then I really do want to tackle things like doing an RPG show. I really want to do the Age of Sigmar Soulbound one. It looks like a lot of fun, to be honest. And I love the Age of Sigmar lore a lot. So I've been reading more novels just to get my head into that, both 40K and Age of Sigmar. So yeah, that's kind of the reason why, but we do plan on doing more of them. It's just not, I don't think it'll ever be like a regular thing just because of the reasons I gave. I was surprised when you didn't do a Roll20 type RPG during the lockdown. So that's an interesting one because I do play Dungeons & Dragons every week. I am the dungeon master for a group, both Steve and Colin are in that group, and then my wife, and then some other friends that are not work related. And when the lockdown started last March, we've been playing for, heck, has it been 3 years now? I don't know, but we've been playing weekly for a very long time. And when the pandemic started, or I should say the lockdown started last March, we realized we wouldn't be able to meet in person, and we still can't. We haven't had the lifting of it enough to be able to meet that many people in person. And so it forced us to learn Roll20. So at the time when Mini Wargaming was first shut down and we couldn't come in, I wasn't comfortable with that technology, with Roll20. Furthermore, all my kids were at home too, so trying to film at home was very difficult. And so now I feel more comfortable with Roll20. There's still a lot of its features that we don't use. Like we don't actually battle on grid maps, but I do use it to put up some maps and some pictures. And of course we use it for all the rolling mechanics, all that kind of stuff. And I'll type things into the chat when they find treasure, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't know if we would do a digital one like that. What we can do, and this is how we're probably going to do the Age of Sigmar one, is we might get some volunteers because I know we have some local people who would love to do it. And that way it can kind of decrease the costs because these people just are willing to come in and just be in the show, kind of like how we've had guests in their battle reports in the past. And we'll do it in the tournament hall where we can position people far enough away from each other that they don't have to wear masks. In fact, technically when you're filming, you don't have to wear masks. You can have multiple people on set and you don't have to wear a mask. But it's like in the case of an RPG show, we can keep them far enough apart. So it's a why not kind of thing. And basically the rules in the law in Ontario, Canada, and it's different all over the world, of course, is that when you're on a film or television set, that's basically a studio setting, you're supposed to set up the studio in such a way that people are more than 2 meters apart wherever possible. So like in these rooms, obviously, it's not quite as possible. And then, of course, everybody who's off camera or support staff are supposed to be wearing masks. And so if we did do it, I could, because the tournament hall is not being used right now, because we're not allowed to hold events and everything, then that would allow us to, set that up and have everybody with their own camera and then do it that way. That way we can all be together physically, but physically distanced as well, so that we don't have to worry about all that stuff. So it's something that's in the works, to answer that question. I was surprised. Okay, so during the second question, from a business perspective, you have to make content that has as much appeal as possible. Example, 40K AOS, and then down the line from there. With specialist games like 30K, Necromunda Fantasy, Blood Bowl, do you see their viewership growing or diminishing? I don't think you'll ever see specialist games viewership be able to match the higher level ones. And that's okay. They don't have to in order to make it worth doing. It's interesting. It's one of those things where it's like you need to do the specialty stuff as well to give some variety, but you need the bread and butter. It's a constant question that we're asking. It's like, we have some excess time here, or we want to talk about our schedule. What do we do? Because we have 5 days of schedule right now, right? The Mondays, Warhammer 40K battle reports, regular size, regular battle reports, or we might play like narrative missions or whatever, but it's just like 2,000 points. Let's play. Age of Sigmar on Tuesdays, same idea. Wednesdays and Thursdays are narrative content. Now, right now, because we haven't been doing narrative campaigns, we've been filling those with Warhammer Fantasy and Horus Heresy mostly. And our employees have been enjoying that. And they get okay vault signups and okay views. And so they're not bad to do. They're good filler content, but they don't get as much as narrative campaigns do. So there's the rub, right? It's like in a dream world, we film whatever we want, whenever we want, right? Like people say, you have the dream job. They're absolutely right. But the absolute pinnacle of this dream job would be, I get to film whatever I feel like playing. Because I love Warhammer 40K. I love Age of Sigmar. I've got my problems with certain parts of the rules or certain armies, but in the end, I love those games. But if I had a choice, there would be other games I'd delve into, or I'd do more RPGs, or I would do all these different things. And the same thing with our staff too. There's a lot of games they'd love to be playing, but it's hard to justify doing it, right? When you're working on such a small budget and such a small staff, like we're not a huge company that can chase the long tail of the market. We've got to focus on where the people are. And so it's a fine balance, like I said before. Part of it, our core business always has to focus on where the popularity is, and then we want to make sure we leave ourselves enough time to do other things so that we can enjoy ourselves even more. Not that we don't enjoy doing these things, but if you only do 40K and Age of Sigmar, you can get tired of that. And so you want to be able to have that variety. Finally, as a content creator, what have you made that you're most proud of? Oh, golly. See, I love the narrative campaigns, but there are certain ones where I feel like the story and game mechanics kind of just clicked a lot better, and I really enjoyed them. If I had to name my favorites from my point of view, not the ones that necessarily did the best in the vault, or in viewership, but just where I'm proud of the story, the mechanics, and how it all worked out. The latest, the Imperial Knight campaign I just did recently with Josh, I was very happy with how that worked out. There's some tweaks to the rules I definitely will do for the next season. But it was just a cool story. The rules just really worked because I really wanted to do an Imperial Knight campaign for him because he had requested that. But Imperial Knights are very boring on the battlefield. Everything's over too quickly, right? Like they go up. If it's two Imperial Knights against each other, who swings first basically is going to destroy the other one. But I wanted a more BattleTech feel or Adeptus Titanicus feel where things slug it out a little longer. So I modified the rules, and I was really happy with the way they worked out. And the story I was very pleased with it. The Orc Death Watch, the Orc version of the Death Watch, I really liked that. We had these really cool custom models that Lee made. I really liked the story. Those ones really worked out well. the Death Watch, the Space Hulk Death Watch, I really, really think that story worked out well. And the mechanics were fine. The Death Watch mechanics I'm constantly refining. I look forward to doing the next Death Watch campaign where I think I'm going to finally create a full set of rules that will be usable by you guys as the audience as well. Because I've gone through a lot of iterations of it. I've learned a lot of what I like and don't like. The new Crusade system has taught me some new ideas. So I think I'm ready to write a full-fledged rule set that can be used by the community without you having to modify too much. Because in the past, I'm like, okay, I've written the rules, but they're just for us. If you want to use them, go ahead and change them however you want. And that's fine, you could still do that. But a lot of people would have questions like, well, what about in this situation? Some people don't want to change things. They just want, give me the rule set and let me do it. I'm one of those people, actually. I prefer to be given the rules already done, rather than giving some, and of course I'll modify things, but I'd like them to be complete. And so yeah, I think those ones are some of the better ones. I like a lot of the stories that the narrative campaigns have done, but those are the ones that stand out in my head. Vos Noctum. I'm curious if you guys have checked out the Warhammer RPGs. I know Luke is a huge fan of the Warhammer Fantasy RPG. I know you said, of course, I've just been talking about the Age of Sigmar one. I bought the new Soulbound Age of Sigmar RPG on a whim, and it's a nicely put together book. I agree. Good art, well laid out, rules seem to be presented excellently. Yeah, I agree. I look forward to trying it out. JP Golo, question for Matt. I'm curious if you will ever do another multi-person narrative campaign like you did with the Death Watch, though would like to see more of them all on the map at the same time rather than one person doing a mission at the time. The chaos of two people working together makes it more interesting. Well, it's funny you should say that because we actually just started filming a narrative campaign this week called The Hungary Nexus, and it is a 5-player narrative campaign. Now, there is story in it. It uses the Crusade system with some modifications. And the story will be more told at the beginning and the end of, we're doing a season of it. It'll be 20 games because there's 5 players. They're going to basically match up against each other once and playing 2 games. And so that's 20 games. And essentially the backdrop of it is there's a pariah nexus being established by Necrons, and the Tyranid hive fleet is swarming through the same sector. And then so that's me and Luca. So that's kind of the backdrop of the campaign, that us having this war. And then the other 3 come in, Dave with Orcs who work for Khorne, they're mercenaries. We've got Steve with Dark Angels, and then Josh with Adeptus Custodes. And each of them are bringing small forces. So they can't come in and destroy the Necrons and Tyranids, but they each have an objective that you'll learn at the beginning of the campaign. Well, we should have some trailer videos out hopefully next week to give you an idea of what's going on. And there's going to be to see the map of the sector. We're going to be choosing specific worlds. And then the players, every player can affect who's winning the war between the Necrons and Tyranids. And then they're also doing their own agendas as well. So it's kind of like it's story driven, but it's less story driven than my normal narrative campaigns where like I advance the story after every game. This one's more like, here's where we are at the story. Now play a bunch of games, and you're going to collect these agenda points for the 3 of them. And then the Necrons and Tyranids have a kind of a sliding bar of who's doing better. And based on who's doing better, it changes the battlefield for everybody. If the Necrons are doing better, then you're more often going to be fighting the Necron Pariah Nexus, and the Necrons have advantages there. So it should be really interesting. So that's going to be coming soon, hopefully in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Miso, Matt, good to see you back for the new year. 1, do you have anything new or different planned for mini wargaming for this year, other than surviving COVID? Well, like I said, this new campaign is something that we're trying out. We're going to be trying out to do more giveaways of armies, because we found that we got a really good feedback when we gave away those Astra Militarum armies. So this year we might really ramp it up and start painting up some new armies, or find some old ones that we no longer use and give them away to people. And so we're going to see kind of what the response to that and how that helps us to grow. Where Dave and I just had a big meeting yesterday where we had some discussions on all the vault levels and making some heavy modifications there to how the vault is structured, including adding in more high-level ones and also another lower-level one too, just to really get that gambit of different people. So those are the major things. Last year was really good. COVID actually was good for the business. Sucks for my family, sucks for a lot of people personally. Obviously those who suffered from it either got sick or know people that died. That sucks. I would never ask for this pandemic to happen, but it has been good for our business. More people are watching stuff online, and so we got a lot more viewership. It allowed us to kind of focus our efforts and reorganize, and we've become a lot more efficient. And yeah, so it's been all good for the business for the most part. Again, it has its struggles, obviously. So I look forward to this year to see how we will grow there. 2, instead of making up new rules for each narrative campaign you do, have you thought of creating a universal heroic rule system that you use for every campaign, maybe with tweaks each time? Might be more efficient to do so. I have thought of that and then didn't like it because I would rather create a system specific to what I'm trying to accomplish. So I learned this when I was when I was a teenager. I was really into custom building my own role-playing games. But I always tried to mimic like what other things had. And I remember there was this one person who responded. I was on this RPG forum. I don't remember what it was called, but it was one, I think it was called indierpgs.com. If anybody here actually has ever been on that site, I don't even know if it exists anymore. And it was just a forum for people who were creating their own role-playing games. And I went on there because I was like, okay, I've got strength, perception, intelligence, because I was a big Fallout 2 fan, and charisma. And I was writing my rules, but I couldn't find a use for charisma. And obviously much older, I can think of all sorts of uses. But in my system, where the way that it was organized, charisma just wasn't fitting in. And so I went on the forum and I posted saying, I know I've created this system, but I just can't find a use for charisma. Any suggestions? And one person responded, and it really changed my way of looking at things. They said, well, then don't use charisma. You don't have to fit everything into a system if your system doesn't need it. And that kind of stuck with me. At first, I balked against it. I'm like, oh, no, I want to use that. But then as I thought more about it, I'm like, you're right. You don't have to create a universally good system. You create a system that does what you want. Like, you look at Dungeons & Dragons, and I have all sorts of complaints about that rule set. I love playing D&D, but the rule set is pretty basic, and that's its strength because it's easy to learn, but it's also its weakness because as soon as you try to do anything that's not high fantasy, fantastic heroism, like we played Tomb of Annihilation, which is like you go into the jungles of Chult, which is basically like in Indiana Jones with dinosaurs and deep in a rainforest kind of thing. And there's supposed to be like this survival mechanism to it. But then, as soon as you have any spells or there's certain class or backgrounds that just let you find all the food that you want or create all the food you want, it's like, oh, survival's not a thing. And or you want to do like a horror-driven thing. It's like, well, this person is immune to this, and this person doesn't care about this, and this person's a paladin, and they just kind of, do all this kind of stuff. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't work as well. And so there's a lot of things that D&D doesn't do well. And that's okay, because if you want to do those things, then you can heavily modify that system, or you can go play a different system that does those things more specifically. So you want to play a post-apocalyptic? Well, don't use a D20 system. Go and find a system that has been created for post-apocalyptic. So I kind of approach the same way with the narrative campaigns. Like, imagine trying to do that Imperial Knight campaign, but using the same heroic rules as like a Death Watch campaign where there's a bunch of Space Marines. It would be hard to make it work without it being bland. And that's really what it comes down to. If you have a universal rule set, it's bland. You need it to flavor to what you're trying to accomplish with your game. And because our narrative campaigns are all over the place, not all of them are squad driven, not all of them are army driven, not all of them are like a single Imperial Knight driven. Some of them play at 300 points, some of them play at 2,000 points. Having one set of rules just won't work. Now, mind you, there are things that I carry forward from rule set to rule set, things that I learn. It's almost like every narrative campaign, I refine my ideas of how I'd want these things to go and learning new things along the way. 3, as a request, could you try doing a bog standard heroic Ultramarines versus evil Chaos Space Marines narrative campaign? Obviously with good story, themes, and characters, but as Space Marines are the most popular by far, it'd be interesting to see if the campaign is successful for the Vault compared to the more unusual factions. Space Marines versus Chaos Space Marines. Haven't we done that before? Yeah, we've had Space Marines versus Chaos Space Marines in previous campaigns. But you're talking like just the regular standard one. Well, that's definitely, you've seeded the idea in my mind. We'll see what happens. I can't promise anything because I don't plan out tons of narrative campaigns in advance, because then by the time I go to do them, I have new ideas and don't want to do those. 4, I listened to your interview on Little Wars and you criticized forums, but what about Reddit? Well, Reddit is, I know it's like, it kind of says that it's the new internet forum, and years ago it started, obviously, and it definitely does a better job. So to me, Reddit's not a forum. Reddit's different than forums. It has the same kind of purpose as forums, but it reorganized how they work. When I criticize forums are fine. I just think that technology has surpassed the forum as a universal tool. It used to be that forums were used for everything, just like in the super old internet. It was the bulletin boards, right? And so forums kind of evolved from that. So they serve a purpose, but they're now a niche purpose. They're no longer just like you can do everything with a forum. Now you have to kind of find the right tool for the right job. 5, finally, in the last sit and talk, you said you played Advanced Fighting Fantasy. Wow, what were your custom rules like? Did you have any favorite fighting fantasy books? I didn't really do custom rules for Advanced Fighting Fantasy. I just played it as is. It's a pretty straightforward system. I didn't have a lot of the books as a teenager, so I couldn't afford to buy everything. So I just had the 4 basic books, which was the rule set, the extra creatures, the Port Blacksand. That was my favorite adventure, because that was one about creating cities. I just got into that big time. And there was a 4th one. I don't remember what it was. I think there was 4. Have you heard of the indie RPG Troika? It's an updated form of Advanced Fighting Fantasy that's very creative. I have not. You'd love it. Order it. I will look at that. Smiling Kira. Hello, Matthew. Hope you have a wonderful day. Well, thank you. Which one do you like more, high fantasy or low fantasy? And which one do you think have more potential to create better and more interesting story and plot? I like them both. Obviously, there's going to be a difference of opinions of defining high fantasy versus low fantasy. Like Age of Sigmar, I look at that and I was like, yes, it's obviously high fantasy. Dungeons and Dragons, the system itself is kind of neither. It depends on the setting, right? Like you could play a low fantasy Dungeons and Dragons if you want, but for the most part, Dungeons and Dragons is more high fantasy. Whereas like your low fantasy is, where the monsters and those kind of horrors are. Like I think, I don't know, would you think like Witcher or Game of Thrones are more low fantasy? Because like, yeah, there's dragons and stuff in Game of Thrones, but they're rare, right? And it's mostly people versus people. I think that's how I picture low fantasy, right? It's more medieval with a few extra high fantasy aspects to it. They're both great. They both tell stories differently. Once again, that's like saying, what do I like better, sci-fi or fantasy? And the answer is, I don't know. There are certain sci-fi that I love, like the TV show The Expanse is just sci-fi done the exact way that I love, which is focus on the science and the people. They get into some crazy stuff as well, but for the most part, they try to stay grounded, I guess would be the word. But I grew up loving Star Trek, which is kind of a more loosey-goosey sci-fi. Not as loosey-goosey as things like Star Wars, which is more like fantasy in space. But then once again, though, it's like Star Wars isn't... If a movie of Star Wars is good or bad, it's not yet usually to do with how much science they did properly or improperly, right? Like it's usually just about, did it have a good story? Did it have convincing characters? That kind of stuff. Maybe some cool action. And like, because like Star Trek, like you look at it and it's changed a lot over the years, right? Since the original series to Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and then all the new stuff as well. They've kind of reinvented it for the new age, which, take it or leave it. I prefer the older stuff, but I'm also older, so maybe that's why. But I don't know, it's stories are stories, and the setting is kind of important in certain stories. Like post-apocalyptic is a good example. Is the story about the post-apocalyptic setting, or is it just about the people and the post-apocalyptic setting is the background? Like, are the zombies and what created the zombies? Like Resident Evil, to me, the story is about the setting. It's like there is a virus and, big bad guys who created the zombies. Let's find out more about that. Then you got like The Walking Dead, which is just like there's zombies, but the story's not about the zombies. They're more just there. And I know sometimes they try to describe some of the zombie stuff, but in the end, it's not about that. So it's hard to just flat out make a comparison there of which one's better, which one do I like better. And it's like, that doesn't really matter to me. If the good story is being told and there's convincing characters, then the setting almost doesn't matter. You could almost transpose that to another setting. But at the same time, I think you can enhance a story with a good setting. But just saying high fantasy doesn't make it a good setting or a bad setting. It depends on how they do their high fantasy and how they do their low fantasy and how they do their sci-fi and how they do their post-apocalyptic, that kind of stuff. Whew. Sticky, hello Matthew. I haven't actually played an in-person game as I got into the hobby after the pandemic started, but can you share about how long a game takes to play? Warhammer 40K, if two people know what they're doing and you play a 2,000 point game, you're looking at 2 to 3 hours, generally speaking. It could be over quicker if one side is decisively destroying the other side, and after 2 turns, it's like, okay, this is obviously done. But if you play like a good full game, it could take between 2 and 3 hours. It takes us longer because we're filming and that adds time. Age of Sigmar is a little faster. Not much, but a little faster. Well, no, it's a lot faster, I would say. It's hard, I don't play games without filming, so it's harder for me to gauge, but I know that we can more easily get 2 Age of Sigmar games filmed in a day, and 40K we need a little more time, so I know that they take longer, and it makes sense because stratagems, and there's a lot more to the game, for better or for worse. You can always play smaller games though and make it go faster. Like 1,000-point encouraging games are super fun for 40K, and you can pop those. You can film or you can play one of those in less than an hour if it goes really poorly for one side, or more like an hour to an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours if it's really close. It is hard to gauge by just watching battle reports, as they're usually cut to be shorter. Yeah, obviously we don't keep filming in between stuff. Also, if you play Tabletop Simulator, do those games run longer or shorter in your experience? I've never played Tabletop Simulator, so I have no idea. I would imagine that they could run, if both players are really familiar with the software, it could run faster because there's less distractions, I guess. I would imagine it runs faster. Jig26020, Matthew, I love This Is Not a Test. Just rewatched seasons 1 and 2. Is there any chance of season 3? Of course, there's always a chance, but we have no current plans. Ghost Game, hey Matt, this is a mischievous question prompted by a Games Workshop vid. Do you think that the Lumineth Light Lords have Australian accents? Good day, mate. If not, what accent do you think they have, and can you do the accent for us? I'm horrible at accents, and I apologize every time I do them. Like, I apologize to Australians that I just offended. Whenever I play dwarves, I do my Scottish accent. It's like, I'm a dwarf. I'm just like, I'm sorry, but I love doing it. And it's not to make fun of anybody, it's just because accents are fun to hear coming out of your own mouth. Because you don't hear your own accent, of course. What accent do I think the Lumineth Light Lords or Realm Lords have? I always think, the thing is, they're just elves to me. Not that they're not interesting. And so that always just has some sort of high, posh British accent. Like, oh, I am an elf. Sorry, that wasn't even an accent. I can't do it. I'm bad at accents, all right? So I always picture a British accent, but when I say British, I mean like your high society London accent, not like the Cockney accent that the orcs typically have, right? Petrified Pickle, good day, Matthew. When you're a 90-year-old curmudgeon with bionic legs, do you hope to still be playing Warhammer? Love your work. Not necessarily. I do hope to still be playing role-playing games, though. That's a lot easier to do when you're old, because you can just sit and do them, right? Skaven Sniper, hey Matthew, would love to see a narrative campaign about Cal Jericho and Scabs. Would you be willing to do one of those, bro? I love Cal Jericho as well. I've read some of the books. Maybe eventually. I don't know. I have no plans. Seraphin Rules 116, hey Matt, now that you've faced off against your ancient nemesis Teclis, what do you think of him and the Lumineth Realm Lords overall? Do you think it's worth it to bring Teclis, or is he just too expensive for his cost? I don't find him to be as annoyingly overpowered as from Warhammer Fantasy, because he had a shtick of what he could do with magic back then. Now he seems proportionately points costed for the cool stuff he can do. I love the Realm Lords. Watching Steve play them, there's so many cool things to them. Maybe too many cool things. It makes them a little hard to kind of keep all the rules right in your head, because they have so much going on with them. But I love what they're trying to accomplish with their rules, at least. And maybe they kind of dialed it up a little too far in certain areas, like how many mortal wounds they can deal out, or the 3-inch reach with their spears, all that kind of stuff. But I enjoyed playing against them. So overall, I like that faction. Are they top tier? I don't know. What's the meta say when we look at tournaments? I haven't been following Age of Sigmar tournaments recently. I've been very busy with web development and other things to try to keep up with that. So I like them. And Teclis, I enjoy playing against him now. He's no longer like, I don't see him and I think, ugh. So I'm happy with what they did with him. The model's weird though. Like, they try to make it look like a big model, but it's actually not that big, but they put it on this huge base with lots of terrain. I wish they didn't do that because it looks weird. It's a cool diorama, but I wish they did it like Horus Heresy, where they sure come with that, but then have like a base that comes off as well, and make it your more typical like large cavalry base. I think that would make more sense for the size of it. Where was I? Mendig! Hi Matthew, how can I become a nicer player? That's hard. That's for me. Not better at the game, better to play against. I often find I get frustrated when things go wrong, and even if the game is closer than it appears, I still end up being salty. Any tips on how to mitigate this to make sure both me and my opponents have a good games? I think I'm the right person to ask because I struggle with that as well. I can quickly get upset by things or tilted by things. I find what you have to do is you have to care a little less about winning. See, what I do is I put my attention into the theme of my list. Now, that doesn't mean I don't try to build a good list. Of course I do. And sometimes I try to build a a gloves off, super competitive list. But for the most part, I try to look at theme. I'm like, what would be really cool to do and collect? And if you kind of go in that way, if you go in just with like, if I don't win, whatever, that's what you have to basically do. You have to approach it more like a game. And I know that's a funny thing to say because it is a game, but it's hard for us not to take these things seriously. I've often wondered why that is, why the psychology of the human brain gets so caught up in these competitive things. And it's not just miniature wargaming, it's anything competitive. Like, look at soccer games. Like, there's riots in the street when one team wins and the other one doesn't. Like, it's a freaking game. Like, it's so unimportant. I'm not saying it's not fun to watch and not fun to root for the players, but to have a riot or to fist fight or to get angry at people who like the other team, we do that though. It's in our psychology, and I don't know why. Maybe it's something to do with the way that our brain evolved to be competitive because it's important for natural selection. I don't know. I don't know what it is. So you're kind of fighting against that natural way that your brain works, that it wants to win because winning means survival. And so you have to you have to go in and just be like, this is going to be fun. I'm just going to have fun and see what happens. And if they destroy you, you need to learn to laugh at that. Now, I say that, and I'm still the one that will get angry too when things go wrong. And so you just do what you can, but try to let it go is the best thing I can tell you to do. And that's worked for me for a lot, because I remember when 9th edition first came out, I was just getting my butt kicked every game. Space Marines were just destroying me because I was playing Genestealer Cults and Tyranids, and they just weren't working. Genestealer Cults still suck. Tyranids I've figured out, and I think I can play them more competitively now. And so after a while, I was just getting bummed out. I'm like, I don't want to play these games anymore. So I had to approach it differently. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to play and I'm going to lose. And I started to have more fun. Once I just expected to lose, I was able to just enjoy the models and the spectacle and the terrain and enjoy myself that way. So, yeah. R. Kenny, hi Matthew and the crew. Would love to see more Dark Heresy style role-playing games. Blue Collar Heresy and Shadows Beneath were amazing, and I find myself rewatching them every 6 months or so. We already talked about that, but I don't disagree. GBC343, hey Matt, I hope you're still doing well, and I hope that the lockdown will not affect you too detrimentally. Hey, I was just wondering, have you ever considered, maybe just for fun, perhaps doing a face-off debate for one of your videos? For example, maybe have two or more people take a side in the debate, maybe with a moderator, and you both argue two sides, such as, are Bone Reapers really OP, or was 9th edition 40k really better than 8th edition? And then perhaps allow the comment section to vote on who won in the end. The winner gets a soda or something, just food for thought. Oh, also, follow-up, I really enjoyed that Firestorm campaign you did a while back for AOS. Will we see another one day? Well, the first part, sometimes we experiment with different kinds of videos, and so maybe we would do that one day. No plans right now. It's once again, you ask the question, I get this question a lot, will you ever do this? Will you ever do that? It's like, all I can tell you is if we're currently planning on doing it or not, and in that case, no. But nothing's off the table, right? Like there's very few things that would say, well, I'm never going to do that, because you never know when things will cycle back, or when we have some spare time or a new edition of something comes out, or a new shiny toy that we want to play with. So it's hard to really give answers to the questions. Will you do this? Will you ever do this? So I know you want to know. Will you ever play this? I really want to know. It's like we don't really know. We don't plan that far out. We don't have our next year's schedule created. It was just, with the release rate of Games Workshop with 40k and AOS, it's just enough to try to keep up with that. And just we do whatever narrative campaign we feel like doing, and we create the content that we like, and we move from there. That's really what it comes down to. T-Sign68, hey Matthew, I hope your week went well. Have you ever thought of putting the Vault video up for purchase if you're a non-Vault member? Yes, actually, we've want to do that, make it kind of a pay-per-view thing. We just haven't yet programmed that system in place. I'm a Vault member, but for those who aren't and are only looking to watch certain ones, sell them for a price where if you bought all videos, it would still be way cheaper to be a member, but still make a little extra profit from people who don't want to commit to a membership, but want to watch those handful of videos they're interested in every month. Also, more importantly, when are we going to see a full Bone Splitters army? I actually want to make one. I've got a few models painted up, but I need to order some more in and get those painted. So I do actually want to try that out. I've heard that they can be pretty fun to play, so I do want to try that. I don't have enough right now for a full army, so I can only mix them in with Iron Jaws for a big wall. No, we've thought of that idea. Dave's wanted to do that for a long time. And now that I'm doing the web development, it's more, I wouldn't be surprised if this year, by the end of the year, you see that implemented. Because we've always wanted to try that. Because, if let's put it this way, 98% of our viewers are not Vault members, which means there's 98% of our viewers that make us very little money because there's some advertising revenue, and that's it. Now, that doesn't mean they're not valuable to us. They're incredibly valuable to us because they're the ones that watch the videos, they comment on the videos. Well, I know Vault members are probably the ones that comment more often, especially on our website. But, for the YouTube algorithms, you want to get lots of views. And so, I'd rather have those 98% watching their videos than just the 2% or 1.4% who are Vault members. And so, but that still means there's 98% of people that you wonder, is there a way for us to maybe make some money off of them besides just a little bit of advertising revenue? And so we have some ideas, but one of them is that. It's like, well, maybe they don't want to subscribe, but would they pay $10 for a season, for example, or $20 for a season on a thumb drive that will ship to them? Or maybe they'll pay for specific battle reports for a couple bucks. And you're right, you make it a couple bucks, then all of a sudden it's like, well, if I'm going to watch 3 or 4 of these a month, then I might as well just get a subscription because I'll save money that way. So, yes, we've thought of that, and I do want to implement that. Hopefully this year we get that in place. It's a lot of work to get it in place, a lot of programming, but I think it'd be worth it. Howzam3, hey Matt, I would like to say I love the Crusade random series you guys have started. Crusade is the reason I got into 40K. I'm super stoked for your big story arc you are building that you hinted to a few weeks ago. Keep doing what your guys are doing. I've never regretted becoming a Vault member. I'm happy I found you guys during the COVID times. Happy working. Well, thank you so much for your support. I already talked about the new campaign, so you've heard about that. But yeah, you should be able to see that soon. So thank you so much for being a Vault member though. Brygon Jin. Hey Matthew, I know you have a ton of other things going on, but do you think you and the others will ever finish Blood Bowl Season 3? No, that one has been canceled, unfortunately. Partly because of the pandemic, but partly because I just can't enjoy Blood Bowl. I've tried to so much, but I get so invested that I get so angry when things don't happen. So you might see another Blood Bowl season eventually, but I doubt you'll see me play in it. RVD 2003, hey Matt, how goes the preparation for the Mini Wargaming Mega campaign? When will we get either a date or the teaser trailers to the armies you've been working on? Already talked about that. Frickin' peanuts. Hey Matt, love those Crusade battle reports you were doing. Any chance we'll see more of those? 3 in a row. Maybe with each producer having 1 or 2 recurring Crusade armies. Now that we're doing this campaign, I'll probably not do that one as much right now, but I do want to kind of continue these random Crusade army things, right? But I'm going to be playing a bunch of them in this campaign with my Tyranids, so that kind of scratches that itch for the next little while. But but we do plan on doing more of them. But like I said, it's a series that we have no requirement to make. Like if they want to do it, they can. But we have to make encouraging games for every Friday. But whether or not they play them as Crusade or not, that's up to them. Sklertic. Hi Matt, you're my favorite content producer on Mini Wargaming. Thank you. So just had to get a question or two in. First, are you worried that the game of 40K will take a hit in quality due to the rapid fire releases of codices? Hasn't yet. There is issues with the way that they released their codexes. It's good for their bottom line. I don't think it's good for the game because it makes it too hard for people to keep up. It brings in new people constantly, but it kind of punishes those who are kind of sticking around because it's like, hey, this army that you just spent hours and hours and hours and lots of money building up because it seemed to be the right thing to do. Well, now there's been 5 codexes that have come out and they're all better than it. So if you want to keep up with them, now you need to make your army like this. Of course, that's good for their bottom line, but it's not great for the hobby. What's good for the bottom line of companies is not always what's good for the hobby. Now, having said that, you want them to make good money so that they continue making more models, but I don't like, business-wise, I love the rapid release because it keeps fresh content for us. But personally, I don't like it for the hobby. I prefer like D&D's approach, Wizards of the Coast approach, that they've been in 5th edition for a while now, and they just keep coming out with more books, but they don't come out with them every month. They give you time to kind of get into whatever it is they've come out with. And then over time, there's a nice big library of them. Secondly, as a fellow Tyranid and Genes of their Cult player, I know what I want for my new codices, but I'm interested to hear what you would want out of these. I feel like the game has hit an unfortunate power creep after the release of Space Marine Codex. The power creep problem has been around forever. It's just escalated a lot over the past couple of years. What do I want from the Genes of their Cult is for them to change up their points cost so that they're actually good to bring. There's a lot of things that have changed, but the Tyranids haven't kept up in a lot of their army. Like all Space Marines went to 2 wounds, and yet none of the Tyranids' abilities, like heavy bolters went up to 2 damage, and flamers increased in range, and multi-meltas got better, but none of the Tyranid weapons got better. Like none of them. None of them had any adjustments, which means everybody else just got a little better. Everybody who uses those weapons, that is. And so it's just like, like Death Spitters were always kind of like a heavy bolter equivalent. A heavy bolter is strength 5 -1, 3 shots. Heavy, 36 inches, but the Death Spitter's 18 inches assault. But strength 5 -1, 3 shots. They're still that. They're not 2 damage now. And so they're no longer like heavy bolters. Now, should they be 2 damage? Well, then they'd have to adjust their points. I'm not saying they should be. I'm just saying that I remember when they're like, we got a huge FAQ update for everybody, and Tyranids weren't on that list. Everybody else was getting weapons updates, even some of the Xenos armies, but not Tyranids. Genestealer Cult's only where they would bring heavy bolters and stuff, which is just on their Leman Russes and things that don't really affect them as much. So yeah, I just kind of want them to update them. Now, my dream thing is that they scrap pretty much 90% of the Tyranid model line, and they do it again because they're just way too 80s and 90s. I'd love just a more gritty, grounded, I don't know if that's the right word, kind of like how I've always said, like how the Zerg portray that kind of swarm, where it's more spikes, and if they're shooting something at you, there's some natural mechanism, not this gun that they're holding. That's more what I would like to see. But obviously, internal balance is important. There is so much stuff in the Tyranid Codex, but internal balance is way off. Like, you're not going to see Raveners and Trigons in competitive lists. You're not going to see Biovores. You're not going to see... there's like Tervigons and Venomthropes and the ones with the big tentacles. Why can't I remember what they are? But like those ones are the Maliceptor. Yeah, you'll see it now with the one stratagem. There's just so many things. Like Carnifexes aren't as good as they used to be. I just want internal balance. I don't necessarily want the Tyranids to be the best codex ever, because then people won't want to play against it. I want it to be just, it's a competitive level with internal balance. Same thing with Genestealer Cult. They're such a cool, flavorful army, but they just suck right now. They have 1 or 2 tricks to make them maybe push themselves up to a top of the bottom tier kind of thing. So that's what I want. Straight Jacket, second question. Sorry if there is any chance of there being some sort of notification to comments being replied to on this website. Oh, not a bad idea. Don't currently have that. Have to be careful about that kind of stuff. I don't want, sometimes you have to do email notifications very carefully, because if you spam them out too much, you get on blacklists. Now, mind you, we use the Amazon's simple emailing system, and so that kind of helps prevent that. So, that's an idea. I'll add it to the list and I'll look into it. Didn't get the name. Straight Jacket again. Hey Matt, are you pleased with the way the new codex are panning out in 9th edition? Are you a fan of the extra complexity, and do you care about the inconsistency between the Marines having a core codex and supplements for the sub-factions, and the Death Guard being its own codex, suggesting Chaos will be an unrelated codex too? I don't really care about those kind of things. I'm not a big fan with the complexity in 40k codexes right now. If it were up to me, I would chop out all the stratagems and command points. I'd love to get rid of command points and stratagems out of 40k. You look at the 2 games, if I could make one change, Age of Sigmar, get rid of the double turn or the random turn mechanic. 40k, get rid of command points and everything to do with command points. I find they complicate the game in such a way that it makes it harder for beginners to learn, and when it comes to veterans, it makes them take longer, because they have to make choices about... It's so funny, if you ever play a game where by like turn 3, all the command points have been spent, the game speeds up dramatically, because now it's like I roll my dice and whatever they are. When I go to attack, I don't have to decide if I want to use this stratagem or this stratagem when I make the attack. Or when you go to attack me, I don't have to decide, do I want to use my protective stratagem, or all that kind of stuff. It just makes the game speed up, and I think that's a good thing for these kind of games. Like, if you want complex rules, you do those at the skirmish level size, right? Like the Kill Team or the Warcry. Ironically, Warcry has simplified things, and it's a skirmish level. And then you go up to larger scale games like 40k, and they add more complex rules. Usually it's the other way around. Usually you keep the complex rules in the smaller games, because then you can have the individualism. In the larger games, you keep them simpler, because otherwise it bogs the game down. So I honestly think command points and stratagems really bog down 40k. They add an interesting level of complexity that can be fun, but you can't deny that they make the game take longer and make it harder for beginners to learn. And those 2 things, I think, work against it rather than for it. So yeah, that's what I think. Griff Gang, hey Matt, I know you all mentioned a while back, but is there any way we could pretty please, just maybe possibly totally understandably, if not, get a Tau game in, maybe on one of the incursion days? I've got the Tau Force all organized, ready to go. I've been planning on doing it, but I haven't been playing much 40k lately because of the scheduling and stuff. You might see Colin pick those up and showcase them in a few games. So we do plan on having them soon-ish. Spokamo, Matthew, what forms do you think the emperor has taken on in history in order to guide humanity? Additionally, do you think that Donald Trump was one of those forms and the events of the past 4 years were part of his goals and plots? What effect do you think he was trying to achieve for his future efforts? I am not touching that question about Donald Trump with the 150,000-foot pole. I am not going to dive into any politics, especially American politics. I am not going to risk that whatsoever. Now, if I go back to your first one, which forms do you think the emperor has taken? If I'm going to take that question seriously in a fictional sense, it would be anybody who like shapes like humanity. So it'd be interesting if like he was one of the main scientists or like somebody. It doesn't necessarily have to be the people we know. It could be somebody who just kind of influences. Like you get like Newton coming up with his theories in science and all that kind of stuff, and maybe it was actually the emperor who seeded those ideas. Or you get like Einstein, like maybe the emperor seeded those ideas. Or you hear about like the great conquerors of old, whether it's the Romans or Alexander the Great or those kind of people, like maybe he was them just trying in his efforts to unite the world in an early time. Or maybe he's the one that introduced fire to the permanent, like who knows? Who knows what it is? But that's kind of the way I picture it. He'd be like, if you can find every big influential part of history, then you can kind of place him there, either as the person, he is Alexander the Great, or as somebody who is like second in command and just whispers in the ear and gets the work done and is really the one in charge. Stormbolter, hi Matthew. Hope you and your family are doing well. My questions is, as I know you love the fluff of 40K World, what is your favorite book series? Also, have you read the Primarch novels and what do you think of them? I haven't read the Primarch novels. I have read a lot of 40K and Age of Sigmar books though. I'd have to say if I look back over all the 40K books that I've read, the ones that have been most compelling to me as stories, and not just because I like the lore, because I read a lot of books more for the lore, and so I'll enjoy a book that doesn't have a fantastic story if it reveals interesting lore things. But when I think about story-wise, then I think of, and these are very typical ones, they're classics, the Gaunt's Ghost series, the Ravener series, both by Dan Abnett, and then I think of like the Caiaphas Cain ones are fun, but I have to say like Gaunt's Ghost and the Ravener series by far are my favorite. And I really enjoyed those. Age of Sigmar side, I know you didn't ask, but I'll answer it anyways. I've read a lot of books. I've enjoyed a lot of them, but I have to say like the Spear of Shadows and Soul Wars were by far my favorite. Those were really, really good books. Mr. Natastic, one of my favorite people to watch. Thank you. Keep at it, everyone. We'll send in questions when I get more accustomed to gameplay. All right, noted. Arashiha? Anyone find the actual answer to the Cygar question asked by Skeet? Okay, so that was something else. Last question. How are we doing for time? Oh, we're actually a little ahead of time. Big Mikey, Matt, hope you and everyone at Mini Wargaming had a good holiday. Was worried about you guys not returning because of the new lockdown restrictions again. Yeah, that didn't affect us pretty much at all. It didn't change the rules for filming studios. It more was a restriction to how long retailers could be open for, and it was more like personal stuff, like not being able to go into other people's houses, even with masks and with physical distancing, and gatherings outside have been restricted down to a very small number. Schools closed for the most part, but our business-wise, it really didn't change anything. So the rules are still the same for us. Besides the mega campaign, any big plans for Mini Wargaming this year that you can share with us? COVID restrictions pending, of course. Keep up amazing work. So also more heresy. All right, so I already answered that question. So our last question was one that I already answered. So I hope that I answered it sufficiently for you. Well, thank you so much for all of your participation today and your questions. Keep it up. Keep them coming. Remember, next week is Josh. Leave your questions below for him. And make sure you go check out the Open Vault and the Mini Wargaming Vault today at the link below. Thanks for watching. Happy Wargaming.